Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Business to Arts virtual members event in partnership with Mason Hayes & Curran. I'm Christina Donovan, and I am the chair of Mason Hayes & Curran and a member of the Art Committee. My esteemed co-host for this event today is Andrew Harrington, who needs no introduction to you. He is the Chief Executive of Business to Arts. The subject of this event today is corporate art collection, management and curation. And we're delighted to be joined by Abigail O'Brien, artist and president of the Royal Hibernian Academy, and by Seán Kissane, curator of exhibitions at the Irish Museum of Modern Art. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Zoom at this stage. We would remind you that at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A function, and we want to make this a useful and interactive discussion. So please raise your questions during the session, and we will try to get to as many of them as we possibly can at the end of the session today. Now, in a moment, I'll hand you over to Andrew, but before I do, maybe a word or two about Mason Hayes & Curran's art collection. Art and support for the visual arts is very important to us in Mason Hayes and to our staff, and it's a core component of our CSR policy. In 2020, we contributed close to 1% of our revenue to charitable causes, including the visual arts. The art collection within Mason Hayes & Curran began quite a number of years ago, over 20 years ago, in fact, initially by Declan Moylan and Coleman Curran partners, and the acquisition of art has always involved our staff. So we started with a somewhat informal and ad hoc committee and developed it into a more structured art committee involving members of across the entire spectrum of staff in the firm. And I think today some of our former members of the art committee have joined us for the session. I just want to acknowledge them and give a shout out to their contribution to the art collection over the years. In terms of the collection and our choices, they're very much informed by, and they are attributable to the tastes and the fashions, I guess, of the time, and also the contemporary issues that are relevant to us in the firm. In the short video, which will follow, it will give you a flavor of the art collection, not all of the pieces, but just a sample, and some of my particular favorites. And I should say in advance, this particular video was prepared before we invited Abigail O'Brien to speak. So just you'll know what I mean when you see the video. So with that, I'll go over to Catherine, and who will share the video with you. Thank you. Welcome to Mason Hayes & Curran. My name is Christina Donovan and I am the chair of the firm. In Mason Hayes, we have had a long association with the artistic community and support for the arts in Ireland. In this short video, we'll take you on a visit to some of our collection, which comprises of sculpture, paintings, photographs and prints. And I hope you enjoy. The first piece that I've chosen to speak to you about is the piece behind me by Blaze Smith, which is a 5-point heavy machine gun, and it is a triptych. The piece is part of a series of artwork that Blaze was commissioned to produce around 2008 to 2010. The reason why I've chosen this piece is that for all of the paintings and artworks within our collection, this piece evokes the most by way of conversation. And for me, this is part of the reason and the importance of art. This piece behind me is artwork by Rowena Dring, and it's called The Barker Dam Joshua Tree. In her work, she uses photography, painting, and needlework, and this piece is primarily a tapestry. I love this piece because for me, it's part Connemara, part Mount Fuji, and I think it's an exquisite piece. This piece is called See No Evil by Ailith Lawler, who is a Cork-born artist. You'll all be very familiar with the concept of the Lady Justice with the weighing scales and the blindfold. And this, I think, is a modern take on that concept and very appropriate for a law firm. This piece behind me is by Abigail O'Brien, and it's called New York View, and it sits in our reception on the 6th floor.
Abigail O'Brien is currently the president of the RHA, the first woman to hold that position. And this piece for me represents part of the international work that she does and that we do here. And there's great energy and heat and vibrancy off the picture, which reminds me of New York in the summertime. This beautiful photograph behind me is by Martin Healy in his Ganzfeld study from 2007. As you can see, it is a blindfolded bird of prey. And this image represents the calmness of the bird in this moment, but also the strength and the power of this bird. The final piece that I have chosen from amongst my favourite pieces in collection is the piece behind me by John Curran, who is a Dublin artist who focuses on abstract art, particularly in the context of artificial intelligence. This piece is called ZXX and it's from 2013. The colours in this are so vibrant and energetic, and for me it represents what the energy might look like that flows through the internet if you could see it with the naked eye.
Thanks for showing us the collection, Christine. It's a beautiful video, and I know that Mason Hayes and Curran's collection is in safe hands with you as chair of the firm, but also heavily involved in the art committee. I'm going to ask Seán to bring up a presentation which we've asked him to put together. While he does that, I'm going to remind everyone that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and you are free to type in questions there, and we'll try and get to questions as we go through this event. Seán, I'm going to hand over to you now that your screen is up. We'll just ask you to unmute Seán there so we can hear you as well.
Now, am I back on? I'm back on track, I think.
You are.
Thank you for the introduction, Andrew, and thank you, Christine, for the invitation. So I'm just going to speak for about eight minutes, maybe 9, just about some thoughts, as I said, about corporate collecting in Ireland, and looking specifically, of course, at the Mason Hayes and Curran collection. And you've all seen the video now by Christine. And I wanted to start my presentation by thinking about that, because I was looking in preparation at the great resources that are available online. And I was struck by the comment by Christine that Blaise Smith's Heavy Machine Gun was one of the most important works for her because it provokes the most conversation. And that really immediately made me think about sort of art that is appreciated, of course, for its aesthetic value, but also art that has a place and function in society, and how this has not always necessarily been the case in corporate collecting, but that aesthetics were more important. And that made me think about the relationship between art and corporations in Ireland in the last 50 years. And certainly one of the most important was driven by the architectural firm of Scott, Tallon and Walker, who all of you will know, of course, from the Aviva Stadium. But Scott, Tallon, Walker was extremely influential right from the early 60s onwards. And a prime example of the style of their architecture is this. It's the Goulding House in Wycliffe from the early 70s. which is clearly a quotation of the Great American House, Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. But looking at the exterior, which you can see here, and then considering the interior, I'd like you to consider how very carefully regulated it is. The furniture is very spare. It's set in a very rigid position. It's generally designed by Mies van der Rohe. And so both the exterior of the space and the interior is an expression of the architecture and the art. You'll notice that there's a small number of abstract paintings, and they are meant to reinforce the formalism of the space, giving it a restful and zen quality, but they're not meant to draw attention to themselves necessarily, and they're not meant to be talking points. And that really finds its expression, its ultimate expression in works like this, which is Sails by Gerda Frommel, which is about form and reflection and mirroring and context, but not necessarily about meaning. And this is from the mid-60s at the P.J. Carroll collection in building in Dundalk. Moving into the 80s, the 90s and onto the noughties, corporate collecting in Ireland was really dominated by the banks. Bank of Ireland, AIB, notoriously Anglo-Irish. But the financial crash largely put an end to their collecting and their patronage. And of course, the collections of Anglo and Bank of Ireland were dispersed. So following the financial crash, public organizations like IMA also lost their funding to acquire work for a number of years, almost a decade. So there's a gap that is very evident in public collections from around 2008 to 2015. And Irish artists were not getting much support or patronage. And that is where organizations, particularly like Mason, Hayes and Curran, came in and they filled that gap. So buying from galleries, keeping them afloat, and by extension, artists in general and the whole art ecosystem. And I'd remind you what a catastrophe the crash was for the art system in Ireland, because a number of galleries that had been operating internationally shut their doors permanently, and others lost their buildings due to the squeeze on their landlords. So it was a very difficult time across the board. And so that's why this snapshot, this image from the Mason, Hayes and Curran collection really cheers me, because it just shows some of the vitality and diversity of the work that has been collected since the 1990s, but also through the crash. But also this image really shows how the people who work in the building are enthused by it, and how that engagement is really encouraged by the firm. So this really is art that lives and breathes in its environment, and it isn't simply a formal adornment to an architectural space, but something that has a function and a message. So I'm going to talk about 3 different paintings just to give you a sense of how diverse the collection is. And looking through it, I was very struck by how up-to-date the collection strategy is and how it really reflects current concerns in society. So for example, Stephen Doyle, this artist, is a very young artist from Cork, who already has had a very large amount of critical attention and engagement for his engagement with the theme of transsexual identities among his friends and peers. His work has already been exhibited at the National Gallery and collected by the Crawford in Cork. So he's very proud to claim to have the first portrait of a transsexual person collected by an Irish national institution in Ireland. A very different approach is taken by somebody like Gowan Dunn, who is very much a historian, but the histories that he mines are esoteric and sometimes even mythological. He considers very broad themes such as borders, climate change, animal extinction, and how humanity will be impacted by all of these things. It's widely accepted that we are now living in the Anthropocene epoch. That is, the present unit of geologic time spanning only the last 100 years, when human activity is now so pervasive that it is literally written in the rock strata of the earth. Considering that previous geologic epochs lasted many millennia, that is catastrophic, and the entire human civilization is now on the brink of collapse. You might ask, how could that possibly be expressed in a painting such as this one, that literally represents a rainbow in a muted color palette? But Dunn is always interested in this collision between beauty and darker histories. So the title is called the First Invasion. And it refers to the clashes that must have happened when waves of people came to Ireland, possibly, for example, the Beaker people as early as 5000 BC, or more famously, the Celts. But Ireland was never an empty space. Ireland used to be connected to mainland Europe by a land bridge, and it had an ancient human population. So Gowan Dunn brings all of these concerns to the making of his paintings so that we can consider human activity, that is literally human culture, as something which is far wider and deeper than we normally consider. A completely different approach is seen in the work of Ava Mulcrone. And as unlike Stephen Doyle, who is concerned with the body and identity, or Gowan Dunn, who is concerned with the lived environment and humanity's action in the world, Ava Mulcrone moves beyond considerations of the physical body, and instead she thinks about the human condition as we become increasingly embedded in a digital world. Have you heard the term nomophobia? No? Well, it's a neologism that describes the fear of being disconnected from technology. So it's that mild panic when you can't find your mobile, or that itch to constantly pick up your phone. So Mulcrone makes conceptual paintings that pull together economics and maths and game theory and abstraction to work through these ideas into an aesthetic understanding of who we are. So that was a very short introduction to this collection, but I think it offers you a snapshot of the very many varied themes and energies that can be found here, and all of the different points of entry and conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for your take on Mason Hayes & Curran's collection. If you are familiar with Mason Hayes & Curran's collection, you will know that throughout their building, it is adorned by many, many artworks, and Sean has picked out a few of them. I'm going to ask Abigail if you could rejoin us there as one of the artists in Mason Hayes & Curran's collection. Abigail has 3 works. Abigail, could I ask you just to unmute as well, and would you tell us a little bit about your 3 works in the collection? We saw one of them there, New York, from 2008.
Yeah, well, in 2008, I was urgently transported to New York for about 9 months to have treatment for a brain tumor. And while there, we lived on the 39th floor, this very big building overlooking Central Park on the front side, and to the back, the Hudson River. And beside us were all these huge skyscrapers. I mean, it was very different to my normal environment. One of the buildings which constantly kept catching my eye was this building which was clad with a kind of titanium material. And I found it very intriguing because everything that it reflected was out of kilter, and a bit like myself at the time. So it kind of acted as a metaphor for how I was feeling. I'm intrigued by the fact that you can't really count the number of buildings that are there. You don't know if that's a boat passing. Is it snowing? Was it snowing? And then there's one chair, that singular chair on a rooftop, and who put it there. So there's lots of things about that building that excited me at the time when I would be looking out my windows.
Really?
Yeah, the second 2 works were from my show Airfix Days. And the reason I was drawn to these little airfix is because I felt they were like a metaphor for life and aging. They had been made by 2 little boys 50 years ago, and somehow the models have survived, a bit like myself, and they now have bits missing and the paint has faded, but they still have a huge potency. And when I came across them initially, they sang to me. So that's why I decided to make a whole show around them.
They're beautiful works. I know many people love them at Mason Hayes & Curran, and it's interesting the time that they are when you consider what Sean mentioned, at a time when budgets were restricted for purchasing art by artists. the continuation of purchase of work at Mason, Hayes and Curran through 2008 through 12, 13, 14 at a time. It's a big deal, and I know collecting is something that you're very passionate about trying to encourage people to do as well. What does it mean for an artist to be involved in a collection like Mason, Hayes and Curran's?
Well, it's very honouring of your practice and what you're doing. As you know, the life of an artist is pretty quiet, and you know, you're on your own. So to be in such an exciting collection with your peers, it's like a recognition of what you're doing, and it's wonderful, actually. Yeah.
Seán, could I bring you back in? When you've had a deeper look at Mason, Hayes and Curran's collection now, how would you describe it in its totality? How would you put it in words?
Well, I suppose it's very personal. It's very personal and very idiosyncratic. I suppose the difference between a public collection and something like Mason, Hayes and Curran is that people can buy something simply because they really love it. They don't have to go through committees in the same way as we do, for example. So that gives you, and sometimes a much more instinctive collection. And that can be very strong then, because it can be artworks that kind of have a gut reaction. And as a consequence, that gut usually responds or appeals to other audiences as well. So I kind of think that is one of the things that I was drawn to, is just how varied it is. And that really, I think, reflects the individuals who've collected it over the years.
It's time to ask Christine to rejoin us. Christine, pop your camera back on there so we can get your perspective of the collection. So you've been aware of its development from Declan Moylan's time and Coleman Curran's time. What's the objective of the collection now? What are you trying to achieve with the collection?
I think there are a number of objectives, I suppose, but the core thing is to support artists living and working in Ireland. And so what the committee does is, in their spare time, is to try and to see as many exhibitions as possible, to follow all of the relevant social media interest groups that link in with artists, and particularly with contemporary artists. And we also obviously look at the different art schools, where, as you know, we have a sponsorship of the RDS Visual Art Award, which is for graduates coming out of art schools. And that as well shows us, it gives us an insight into the talent that's coming online, if you like, and that's becoming available to us. In terms of the development of the collection, what we, as you said, and I think Seán has alluded to this, part of the objective is for staff engagement and to provide an environment up until March 2020, what was an office space, to be surrounded by beautiful artworks and to encourage an element of imagination and creativity. We're a law firm. Some of what our work involves is generally very serious, quite technical, involves a lot of concentration. And I think it's important when you lift your head up from your desk that you are surrounded by these beautiful artworks and you can appreciate them and the other professions that are out there that contribute overall to our society. And I think post March 2020, if you can kind of consider that as a very significant month, that it's been more of a challenge, obviously, in terms of accessing art and accessing exhibitions and artists. And so we, like the RHA, like Business Arts and other institutions, IMA as well, has done a huge amount online to try and connect with that community. From a development perspective, we want to try and expand our collection over the next couple of years. But we do it, and as Seán has said, in a somewhat ad hoc and informal way. Because, for example, the piece that you pointed out, the Stephen Doyle piece, Mia, that was purchased from the Royal Ulster Academy I think in December of 2019, and we collected it in 2020. And so when going to these big exhibitions gives us an insight as to what people are doing. And the RHA, its annual exhibition as well, is a wonderful opportunity to see such a variety of artists and what they're producing, both professional and non-professional. So it gives great insights as to what people are doing out there. And I think that is very important.
I love the way how your art committee are almost handing the baton on to the next generations regularly, or trying to ensure that you're bringing people on the education of the visual arts sector throughout the firm. It's a really strong personal characteristic of Mason Hayes and Kearns. We have a question from Aideen Howard, who's director of the ARC. And she wants to know if Mason Hayes and Curran have ever commissioned an artist. And I know Corbin Walker's piece in your atrium was specially commissioned for the building. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And maybe Seán, I might ask you just to talk about that work as well. Go ahead,
Yeah, that piece was commissioned for the building around, it must have been commissioned, I think, around 2004, 2005. Prior to that, as I'm sure some of you with long memories will know and remember, we were in offices in Fitzwilliam Square and a number of other offices in George and Dublin. And then we moved to Barr Street, which was at that time starting to develop as a more kind of commercial centre. And our nearest neighbor now is Google. So it's obviously Google Doc, and it's very now much more vibrant and busy center than what it was. And at the time when we were moving into that building, or prior to moving into that building, we wanted a significant centerpiece for our building. And that's when Declan Moylan was very instrumental in that, in reaching out and arranging and commissioning that specific piece. And it does form the centerpiece of our lower ground floor, which we use and we have used to entertain and for various events, including our annual end of year show that we have and have had up until 2020 in our office. From time to time, we have also commissioned other pieces. For example, we commissioned some pieces by Jane Rainey, and I believe as well we commissioned a piece from Mike Fitzharris for our collection. But we do commission from time to time, and actually it's interesting, it's something that we will be looking at again, I think, as we go over the next couple of years. However, we prefer not to commission because we don't want to limit or confine the artists in terms of their imagination or their creativity, or limit them in terms of the type of artwork that they want to produce. Because I think sometimes, even though patronage is wonderful and commissioning is a fantastic way to support the arts, there can be a sense of sometimes limitations around that because of the audience or the perceived audience. Whereas as I mentioned already, I like to think that art is very subjective and it should always be the point of conversation. So whether you love it, like it, or indifferent to it, most people will have a reaction when they stand in front of a piece of artwork. And I think, as Abigail has mentioned, when you look at artwork, each person will see different aspects, different issues, light and shade, density, brushwork, photographs, shadows and light. All of that is so important and so subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Seán, I might ask you about Corbin's work. Abigail, I'm going to come to you in 1 second as well with a little bit more questions about RHA and their approach. But Seán, tell us a little bit about that work and Corbin's work in general, its importance.
So there's a funny coincidence because, of course, Corbin is the son of Robin Walker, of Scott Talon Walker. So he grew up steeped in that modernist aesthetic from kind of the 1930s onwards, obviously not born in the 1930s, but he was, as a child, he was growing up around these debates of modernism, of architecture, of reflection, of glass and of steel. So he brought that architectural aesthetic into the making of his sculptures. But Corbin has the condition of dwarfism. And so his idea of scale, that is architectural scale and artistic scale, is measured through his body. And so one of the things that he has always tried to do is present artwork from his physical viewpoint in a way to try and force other audiences to deal with his scale, as opposed to the scale that he always has to deal with in his lived environment. And that's kind of one of the sort of central ideas of his work. Of course, the irony is that in Mason Hayes and Curran, he's had, I don't know, is it 5 towers at least? Each one built on top of the other. So that it has become kind of Corbin's world, which is about sort of scaling things down and bringing them to a sense of miniature. And in that space, it's been really scaled up into something monumental. So there's a lovely tension there between his usual work, if you like, and this commission, which is doing something really quite different.
Abigail, in the Royal Hibernian Academy's case, you are both collectors. You amass a considerable collection of important Irish art from Academy members, but you also encourage others to develop their collections. Could you give us a little bit of a background? Tell us about the Royal Hibernian Academy's collection.
Well, the collection is coming from members. When you join the Academy as a member, you give a piece of your work, hopefully the best piece that you have. And so we have quite an interesting eclectic group of works. We have about 400 works in our collection at the moment. And with each year, as the members become younger and more contemporary, the collection is changing. And unfortunately, our collection was burnt down in 1916. So we had to start again from there. We would usually have a show of the collection maybe once every 2 years with an emphasis on one part or another. The last one was new acquisitions to the collection. When I joined as president, or became president, I had this idea that, you know, a lot of the collectors that we would see coming in and buying works in our annual exhibitions, or when we have shows in the gallery, particularly the Ashford, were, if you like, people of substance. You know, they were established in their careers, a certain age group. And I think it's important to encourage younger people as well to see that this is a good thing to do, and not just be buying canvases from IKEA to fill their walls or prints. So we started the President Circle, and I was helped with my son, Emmett, about this. He gathered together a group of his friends for me, and we have a night every month where they come along. It's kind of considered a date night for many of them. It's, you can bring a friend or your partner or whatever, and we would have talks. So it's to help people to feel relaxed amongst artworks, not in any way inhibited, so they can enjoy themselves. They can ask as many questions as they want. We would certainly have a group in now for Seán Scully's show, for example. We have a great show coming up with Damien Flood. And it's like, you know, the first group we had together was for our annual exhibition 2 years ago. And again, Emmett had said to me, now, Mum, they don't have any money, so don't be expecting them to buy anything. So I said, okay, fine, no problem. And because we have this fantastic variety of work between established artists and younger artists and perhaps people who are not professional, we have a lot of price points in our exhibition. And at one point I noticed they'd all scattered like mice around the gallery. We had lost their attention, myself and Patrick Murphy, and they were buying the works. It was brilliant. And in fact, one of the members had fancied a piece of work, I won't say by which artist, and he was thinking about it. Himself and his wife were chatting a lot about it, and he loved it, and she wasn't sure would it fit, and all this kind of stuff. All the normal things that you would be thinking of when you're buying something. But he loved it, and he didn't buy it that day. And when he came back the next day, it was gone.
He missed out.
He missed out, yeah. So I would say if you see something that you love, don't hesitate.
The social atmosphere that you're creating around the President Circle is designed to help people just feel relaxed in the contemporary art world. I know
exactly.
In Christine's case as well, I think you have quite a relaxed view to your art committee in that people talk openly. There's probably lots of conversations around how you decide on which artworks. Tell us, how do you make the decision, and is there a curator involved in helping you that? That's one of the questions from one of our participants here.
Well, I think the art committee have been very active in managing the collection and in the acquisition. So over time, as an example, some pieces have had to be reframed so that we could show them in a better aesthetic than maybe as they were framed when we purchased them. We also, as pieces are positioned and hung in the building, and we're sort of amateur curators in that respect, and we have, as you know, leaned on yourself, Andrew, and the team in Business Starts as well to help us from time to time time, to show off pieces in the best light. And sometimes pieces haven't been located in the best location. And so we do move pieces around. And part of that, and the rationale for that as well, is to allow people to enjoy the pieces, so that a lot of our pieces are hung in the public areas that are accessible to members of the public that are coming in to meet colleagues or to meet friends and family, or that are doing business. So they get to see some of the pieces, but obviously there are a lot of pieces as well hung in the larger meeting rooms, and not everybody gets to share them to quite the same extent. I absolutely agree with Abigail's point. Sometimes when you see a piece, there can be a bit of a gut reaction as to whether you love it or don't. And in that instance, there can sometimes be a gut instinct to say, I'm going to buy it, and then I'll justify my purchase afterwards with members of the art committee. Happen. I mean, I won't say that we don't do it like that. What we do try and do is decide amongst ourselves. We do share all of the information that's available to us about exhibitions. And we would let people know if we're going to try and attend a particular exhibition. We have also set up, we're sort of become very modern in our ways, in that we have a WhatsApp group that we haven't used it so much in the last couple of months, but the idea of setting it up was for this purpose, that if somebody finds themselves at an exhibition and they find a piece that they think is absolutely glorious and would like and think it's an important piece to add to our collection, that we can share that information instantaneous and get an image immediately, and then make decisions on that basis. But sometimes I agree with Abigail, you sort of have to go with your heart and then maybe justify it with your head later.
Okay, well, give us an example. You went with your heart recently. Tell us about something that you purchased in recent months.
In terms of the pieces, since COVID, we've obviously been limited, like everybody else, in terms of getting access to physical exhibitions. And one of the things that we have done within the firm for staff and for clients, we have an end of year show, and we've had that for a number of years, where we physically, prior to 2020, brought people into the building. So last year, we went online. So it was, again, in the art committee, Ciara Brown, Emma O'Hara, Frank O'Flynn, Kevin Hoy, and David Brennan, all of us together worked to put that show online. And we reach out and we try and keep abreast of artists that are of interest and that we like their work, and that they're, again, a variety of styles and patterns and on subject matter. And so this year we were looking at our pieces online, and so decisions that were made again with an online image, where we purchased two pieces at the end of the year. One was a sculpture from Alva Gallagher called Ebb, which is a beautiful glass sculpture, and it looks like the tide is going out, and it's that layers and ripple across glass. I think it's very beautiful. So in terms of selecting that, we had a little bit more time, I guess, than some other occasions, because it was immediately before our show went live. So we had obviously the benefit of seeing the piece before our clients and the remaining of the staff saw it. And the second piece that we bought at the end of the year, towards the end of the year, was a piece called Periphery by Rachel Clark. And it is a beautiful piece. It's a painting. And I thought it was very appropriate for the year that was in it. Again, kind of going back to what Seán said about things that are contemporary. It's about two people that are sitting in close proximity, but yet there's clear distance between them. And that distance is also demonstrated by the color and the light and shade in the particular zones within the painting where they sit.
Sounds beautiful. Seán, in Emma's case, the collection and the acquisition of works has changed in recent months. Tell us about priorities from Emma's perspective as a national cultural institution.
Well, I suppose firstly, we're in the happy position to be able to acquire substantially at the moment, because last October, Minister Catherine Martin announced a fund of €1 million that is going to be split between ourselves, Emma, and the Crawford in Cork. And so the announcement was really made both to enhance the national collections, but also to provide support for artists at this unprecedented time when exhibitions have been cancelled, and so the kind of normal way that artists would have made a living has been taken away. And so you were kind of asking about Emma's strategy and policy, and one of the things that we've been trying to do in the last year is really look at a holistic view of the whole country and the national collections, so that we can get agreement between the various museums and galleries to get a consensus, and also to not duplicate acquisitions. But also so that we can spread the acquisitions more broadly nationally, and not just have a concentration in Dublin. And I suppose in terms of IMA, we are in a position where we are buying obviously somewhat more experimental work very often. And so we have been really thinking about questions on how you can collect ephemeral practice. So that's particularly things like performance art. How do you collect performance art? But also considering things like art in the landscape or art that exists solely online. How can you collect that? And we've been putting a lot of thought into how can you collect time-based media. So for example, film or video installations. And I know this is something that corporate collections often have a real problem with. They don't know how they can collect it or how they can display it. So for example, you have to deal with the problem of obsolescence though in digital technology. For example, does anyone remember Betamax or the video war with VHS? Well, VHS won the war, and IMA owns a number of artworks which are stored on VHS. But of course, those are now completely obsolete. So as a museum, we have to continually make a policy and think about how a collection can continually evolve, remain current, while of course also respecting the original aesthetic and the intention of the artist.
I know we're flying through time here as well. One of the questions in from Jean Kelly, an ex-Mason Hayes & Curran solicitor and board member of B2A, is question for all of the panel in due course. Have you advice for people looking to refresh their collection? Thank you. So help us. This is one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Well, Abigail, maybe I might ask you from your perspective, how would you advise people to develop their collections now?
I think if they had the passion that Mason Hayes and Curran are showing, it would be just fantastic. I think follow your gut, buy what you love, talk to artists, meet them in their studios, talk to other people involved in the arts, like you know, Seán, curators, galleries, the RHA. Come and see us and what we're doing, and start from there. I mean, we facilitated something like 20 million in the past number of years for collectors buying art from the RHA. So we've got a good handle on it, and we're here. Come and see us and what we're doing. 20 million is some achievement. I know that the annual exhibition last year was significant, even though it went online. It was a successful sales. It was absolutely brilliant. And in terms of artists, in the last year, we've been able to secure over 600,000 euros directly to artists. So we were absolutely thrilled. But then I suppose a lot of people know that we're, you know, we have expertise. All of the members who are selecting the work, for example, for the annual, are artists themselves. And so there's a keen eye being cast on the works. And so there's a lot of trust.
Seán, in your case, advice, what should people do?
Yeah, I do have a hot tip, in fact, which is connected to Mason Hayes & Curran, which is the RDS Visual Arts Awards, which Mason Hayes & Curran is a sponsor. But that basically was set up about 4 years ago now. It is an evolution of the Taylor Art Prize, which has been won by people like Dorothy Frost, Alice Maher, Mary Swansea, Roderick O'Connor. I mean, an incredible list of luminaries. But they updated the prize around 4 years ago to become a more rigorously judged process, but also to lead to a major exhibition that takes place at the RDS. Now, I have to confess, I am both a judge and a college curator for the RDS. which means that I am sent to the colleges to look at the end of year exhibitions, and I make a long list. And then that goes to a judging panel, which is made up of the National Gallery, the RHA and IMA, who select a shortlist of around 12 artists, and then a major properly curated exhibition is put together. The first curator was Alice Maher, and I think the last one was Amanda Coogan. So that is where you genuinely get an incredible sense of what is happening right now in graduate practice. And I think, you know, these are people who are maybe 22 years old. I hate to say they're already a different generation to myself. But the point being, thank you, Andrew. But the point being that the sort of aesthetic and the viewpoint and the way they think about the world is really quite different and often challenging and invigorating.
Abigail, did you want to come back in there?
I do. I mean, I think that's a fantastic tip, Sean, but you're talking about very, very young artists there. And I think it's important to consider mid-career artists and artists who have been around for an awful long time, that their work is, I mean, it has been proven and it's shown the test of time as well. And when people are thinking of a collection, they need to kind of dig deep, you know. They should be, you know, perhaps buy one piece of fabulous work in the year instead of 15 pieces which are good. I mean, and it's, you know, it's kind of weird to be talking about what's good and what's not good, but you know, like, I'm just thinking of some of our older artists who are superb and get overlooked because of their age.
Christine, in your case, what would you advise people to do?
I think in terms of refreshing your collection, which I think is what Jean was asking about, is the you to look at different options, and we've looked at exploring different options because we have the majority of our collection is on display within the building. Some of it is not accessible to the public, it's on the working floors within the building, so it's visible and available to the staff. We have looked at other options. We have looked at, for example, if artists are having exhibitions, they sometimes come back to us and look to take the piece on loan for the exhibition, and we're very happy to do that, to loan out pieces, and then that might free up space for us in a, you know, in a particular strategic area where we don't want to have just a blank wall. We want to use that space to exhibit some of our other pieces of our collection. Other things that we've looked at is, and in fact, this was a suggestion of our managing partner, is looking at, well, is there, apart from loaning out pieces to for exhibitions and for those particular type of events, to look at maybe loaning out pieces to academic institutions where they may need, again, particularly now going forward, where you're looking at trying to create pleasant and, you know, atmospheric locations, whether that's in big spaces in particular, you know, in big concert areas or big communication halls, because I think a lot of now going forward, you'll be looking at bigger spaces with smaller numbers of people in them. So we're looking at those kind of things. In terms of refresh, we're also looking at, you know, in terms of how we would curate our own pieces possibly more effectively. And that's where I think what is a key component of the conversation here is the element of curation, because some of what we have done within the, and actually this was, I think, a suggestion that Andrew, you had made to us at different times, is that we have we have more than one piece by some artists. And so we are thinking about creating and designating particular meeting spaces to particular artists or to a single artist if we have enough of their pieces. And then that will free up other space, just I suppose to make better use of the space that we have. But I agree with Abigail's comment, which is that from the point of view of supporting the arts, it is important to support arts at all of the different stages of their career. And so we tap into all of those, or we try to. I'm not saying we're perfect by any means, and we don't always get it right, but we do try and tap into the different areas where artists are working. So the RDS, VAA, and the graduate shows are very early stage. And then we look at the RHA Varnishing Day and all of the galleries that do such wonderful work and have some wonderful exhibitions throughout the city in Dublin and elsewhere. And then look at the exhibitions there from artists that are, as Abigail said, working and trying to make a living in a creative, in a very challenging creative environment.
Christine, we have a couple of questions directed to you. One of those is from Tony Lawless and another one from Fergus Dowd, both in Irish Life. And they want to know about how active are the staff involved in the purchases at Mason, Hayes and Curran, and how do you set like parameters of the amount of money that you spend? What's the guidelines? What do you allow people to decide themselves?
That's a very interesting question, and it's a difficult answer because I think it does. It's movable and it's flexible, if I could say it like that. So in terms of the staff involvement, what we have done, apart from the art committee, which is open to any member of our staff to engage in, and what we find is that people are very interested when they hear about the concept, but then we need people to actually apply themselves. So, you know, as in any committee, there are those who are the workers, and then there are those that just are on the committee for the sake of it. So we try and encourage the people that are on a committee to get involved, actively involved in our efforts as the committee within the firm. And one of the things that we have done is the committee have gone out to galleries and have selected a couple of pieces, and then we have on a number of occasions done what we call a staff pick. So we might go to a gallery and say, we are going to purchase a piece from you this month, but what we want you to do is to maybe pick 3 pieces by Irish artists, or as I've said, artists resident in Ireland. Don't necessarily mean Irish people. And then we would show them in our office, and then staff vote. And in the past, we would use how people vote is through our internet, and we set up a poll, and we would then purchase the piece based on the voting. And in terms of setting the price point, we don't limit it at the beginning. We tend to rely on what the gallery will provide us with. What we are conscious of, obviously, is that as Abigail said, it will vary from year to year. Sometimes we want to invest and we have a particular requirement where we feel a significant spend, or we might increase the budget for a particular piece that we want to make an investment. And then other times we feel that our resources are better spread around in terms of supporting a number of different artists. So there really is no right or wrong, and no perfect way of doing it. But I think one of the things I would say to encourage people that are thinking of, you know, starting an art collection is start. Buy something, something that you like, and start from there.
Just do it. Just jump in.
Yeah, exactly. Jump in, because there's no such thing as bad art. You might get a bad review, but there's no such thing as, I don't think there's such thing as bad art. I think it's art will always invoke conversation, and people will always comment on it because it's always better than a bare wall.
I have a question here that I'm going to give to all of you. This is from Evie McCarthy, who's director of Sample Studios down in Cork. What advice would you give to contemporary artists who are hoping to appear on the radar of firms who are actively acquiring new work by Irish artists? I think all of you might have a take on that as to what advice you might give to emerging artists or younger artists. Seán, do you want to take that?
Well, I suppose, first of all, to remember that we live in a democracy and that the public institutions are owned by everyone. So it is my job to meet any artist that invites me for a studio visit. Now, studio visits are currently on Zoom, but there is a kind of perception that curators are in an ivory tower and they're completely inaccessible. That's just not true. All you have to do is literally email somebody and say, would you have half an hour or an hour to talk about my practice? And it's up to me to say yes, or if not me, to say, well, I think this curator is more appropriate because that's the type of practice they're interested in. So you would be amazed at how many studio visits I routinely do. But you know, I have to be asked is one of the things, and that's I kind of think one of the things for me to say to an emerging artist is reach out. You have to introduce yourself. It is a myth that the curators will magically find you. It doesn't work like that. And to really consider that the institutions are very close to you wherever you are, and that the staff are generally accessible.
Abigail, in your case, what would you advise?
Well, I tell you, I found this question an anomaly throughout my practice because I don't want to be hassling people. I've been told by gallerists that if unsolicited work gets thrown in the bin, you know, you certainly, there's this thing about going out and going to as many openings as possible. But if you've got small kids, the openings are on at 6 o'clock in the evening, so it's not exactly a great time. I think that the institutions will have to make more of an effort themselves to go and meet artists who are down the country, around, you know, in Cork, Galway, wherever you are, right? And there are some curators who are hugely energetic, and I'm in awe of them because they actually do go out and seek out new work. Like, for example, Pat Murphy in the RHA goes around the country talking to artists, and every year we have our Futures exhibition, which is a fantastic experience for young artists to have the equivalent to a museum show. I suppose the only thing you can really do as an artist is, if you're in a show, send an invitation and hope, fingers crossed, that somebody will turn up. I'm a little bit on the the negative end of things, you know.
Yeah, I definitely think there's more that can be done in this virtual environment to open studios. And I know that lots of institutions are doing that as a regular program, but there is probably more that can be done to help people find those studios and the online content that exists out there. Christine, in your case, what would you advise?
Yeah, I think it is a challenge for artists to reach some corporate audience. I mean, as well, I think a lot of artists wouldn't, I guess, echoing what some of the others, the speakers have said, sometimes people don't know about us. You know, as a law firm, we're not an immediate home and an obvious home for artists to think about that we might be interested in their work. And I do think that, I guess like Seán, because we try and to advance the cause of artists and visual arts through a number of mediums, through things like competitions, through the, you know, partnering with the with the RDS, and also we select artists ourselves for our own show. But some of the time artists approach us, and I guess a bit like what Seán had said, we welcome artists actually reaching out to us. It doesn't mean that we are giving any guarantees to anybody, but it informs us and it helps us to understand and to learn a bit more about who is out there and the work that they're doing. Because, and again, you know, prior to last year, I suppose we would have as well had some geographic limitations. We would have tended to look at galleries and artists that were accessible to us in Dublin, because our preference would be, as I've mentioned a number of times, to go and actually see the artwork. Whereas now, you know, we're very keen to get involved and to be invited to see online shows.
I'm gonna have to pause you there, because I'm worried that our time is going to cut out and we're just about to finish. And we are just about to finish. I know we could continue this conversation, but what I would like to say, first of all, is it's great to have a corporate collection opened up online and to show that you can do that in a digital world. And Mason Hayes and Curran are the only company at the moment to do that. We'd welcome more companies to come and talk to Business to Arts about how we could do that. Dr. Abigail O'Brien, thank you very much for joining us as president of the RHA. I encourage people to look at the President's Circle, which is the collector circle that Abigail mentioned in this conversation. And in Seán's case, one of the hot tips I know is that IMA will have a great public art program out on the grounds of IMA over this year. So watch out for that as well. You have some good tips in there, the RDS Taylor Art Prize, and also looking out at the Futures and the RHA exhibition, and then just committing, buying a piece of work is good to do. So Seán, Abigail and Christine, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for imparting your knowledge. And this will be recorded, as far as I know, and will be available if people do want to dip in. But feel free to reach out to people here and ask them for questions. And if you do have questions, come and talk to Business to Arts. Thank you very much, everyone. It's 7 o'clock now. We will say goodnight, allow people to have their dinner or a glass of wine, and look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much.